Okay, it looks like we're live. Hi everyone. For those new here, my name's Nicki. I'm an author and editor, and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading, and all the other things I love. And it's the reading we're here for today because it is the end of the month, and it's time to talk about the books I've read during February. So let me get rid of the banner. There we go. So I think we've got about 14 or so to get through this month. In some ways, it's been a slow reading month, and that's partly because I've read a couple of sort of bigger, longer books that have taken more time, and partly because I've had a hugely busy month, and in the evenings I've been so tired that my reading speed's really dropped off, so it's taking me a bit longer to get through things than it normally would. I am still on track with my Goodreads reading goal though, so that's fine, but hopefully in the coming months I can pick up speed a little bit. I've got a few NetGalley runs I need to get through, so hopefully I can get through a few more in terms of volume and numbers in March. But for now, I still have a few to discuss. So I'm going to kick off with the first one on the list here, which is Odins Child by Siri Pettersen, and it's a book that I received from NetGalley. This is a fantasy story. It's the first in a series, I believe. And Herka, the main character, is a girl who was born without a tail. All the people in the world have tails, and she doesn't. And that's hidden by her adoptive father, who creates a series of scars on her back to make it look as if she lost a tail in a wild animal attack. Because if she was discovered to have been born without one, she would be ostracized and by society. So, and because she doesn't have a tail, she also cannot access the might, which is kind of the spiritual force that everyone else in the place uses. And all this comes to a head at her coming of age ceremony, when she has to display her ability to use the might in order to be accepted. In the background, we've got a few things going on. We discover that she is a child of Odin because she doesn't have a tail. And there are those that are trying to open gateways between different worlds, which is where she has probably come from. I don't want to say too much more than that and spoiler it, but I gave this 4 stars. It's a really enjoyable fantasy series. I liked Herka as a character, and the first book definitely left me keen to read on and find out what would happen to her next. There is a bit of a romance element with the son of a sort of leading family who discovers her secret and tries to help her. And the romance wasn't my favourite part of the book, but it wasn't badly done, so it didn't bother me one way or the other. But definitely I found this enjoyable and entertaining enough to want to read more in the series. Next up is a book that I borrowed from a work colleague. It's called The Discomfort of the Evening, and it's written by Netherlands author Marieke Rijneveld. This story is one that she gave to me to read because she was unsure about putting it out on the communal book pile we have at work, because she was worried if the content wouldn't be suitable to put out. So I had a read of this. It's basically about a young girl who she lives in rural Netherlands, and one day her older brother is going out ice skating, and she's upset about being left behind, and she asks God to kill the brother, essentially. And he does die. He falls through the ice, and grief kind of overtakes the family, and the family members react to this in different ways. It's a very visceral book in some ways. It's quite violent. However, it's a book I didn't love and I didn't hate. I gave it 3 stars in the end. Well, really, essentially a 2.5 that I rounded up to a 3. Because I found that I kept waiting for the characters to hook me and the situation to emotionally engage me, but it never did. And I kind of felt that all the shocking aspects of the story were just there to shock me, just for the shock value. I don't think they added anything to the story. I didn't feel emotional about it, as I said. And I mean, this book won prizes, but as usual, when I found a few times lately, I've read books that have won like the Booker Prize and various things, and I've been there thinking, really, why? Like, what is it about this book that made the judges think it was that great, because to me it was pretty damn average. And that's why I only gave this one 2.5 stars. I thought the premise was interesting, but the way it came together just didn't work for me. And as I said, I think it was relying too much on trying to shock readers rather than engage with them on an emotional level. Next up, back to NetGalley for Doll by Peter Leggatt. This was an interesting work. I gave it 4 stars in the end. And it's a 2 POV piece about a sex doll, essentially. So the first half of the story is told from the POV of the sex doll as she's brought home by her new owner and engaged with him in various ways, and only to be later discarded. And then we see the same period of time, but from the owner's point of view. Look, this isn't a book I'd want to rush to reread again and again or anything like that, but I thought it was an interesting idea, and I thought the way it was presented was nicely handled. It was certainly interesting to see the way the two characters viewed the same situation from such different perspectives. So if that sounds like something that would interest you, as I said, it was 4 stars for me. I enjoyed it, but I enjoyed it mostly from its novelty value, as being something a bit different than anything I've read before. Next up, again from NetGalley, and again a 4-star read, was The Stolen Kingdom by Jillian Boehme. Now this is a fantasy book, a standalone fantasy, which is nice for a change, because so many fantasies end up being duologies or trilogies. But this was a standalone story. It's a kingdom in which, in the distant past, was ruled by one particular family who had access to magic, and they was used to help keep the kingdom stable and prosperous. But one day, after an attempted coup, the magic is stolen and presented to another family, who then become the ruling family. However, for them to keep the magic, it involves a lot of dark blood rituals passed on from father to son. And our heroine in the story turns out to be the heir of the original legitimate ruling family. And so a group of nobles want to use her to put her on the throne and restore the status quo, as it were. So she's taken to court. She has natural magic of her own, and she ends up having to liaise with the second prince, not the heir, but the spare, if you like. And she then comes to feel difficult about the plan, which is to exterminate the current family, because she finds herself liking this young man. And in order to save him, her actions ruin the coup in some ways. However, that sets off another series of events, which I won't describe because of spoilers, but there is obviously a romance between these two characters, and I thought that was reasonably well handled. It didn't come across too much as insta-love. You could kind of see their feelings developing a little bit more slowly, and whenever it felt a bit rushed, you saw the characters at least saying, "Oh, I'm amazed that, how am I feeling this after such a short acquaintance?" At least it wasn't just taken as granted. The pacing was pretty good. I liked the story premise, which was original and interesting. There's a bit of wine growing background story going on as well, if you like wine. And overall, it was an enjoyable fantasy read. And as I said, nice to see one that is just an enclosed single story for a change as well. Sticking with fantasy and NetGalley, I read Songs of Insurrection by J.C. Kang. This one, unfortunately, didn't quite hit home for me. I gave it 2 stars in the end. The premise of this one is there is a lost magic of dragon song that can be used either for good or evil. And our main character is the princess, who has a beautiful voice. And it turns out that she has latent magic inside her, which is awakened by a disgraced foreign visitor, a foreign prince called Sadiq, who comes and helps her discover her power. I really wanted to love this because it's fantasy with a bit of an Asian cultural infusion. It sounded really great, but it was a long book. It felt a lot longer even than it was. It was 400 odd pages. but it felt way longer than that because I really had to push myself through it. Kaya, the princess, she meets this guy and within seconds is desperately in love with him and just follows everything he tells her. The guy in question, Hardeep, is not a brilliantly realised character. I didn't get much of a sense of him at all, other than the fact he was handsome and charming and liked music. So their relationship was so insta-love and two-dimensional that really kind of threw me off the main part of the story, I guess. I did enjoy the scenes with Ji and Tian, who were secondary characters, and they had a bit of substance to them. We got a bit of backstory for them, and their scenes were the most enjoyable in the book, whereas the main narrative, I was really just skimming through by the end because I just wanted to get through it. It just didn't work for me. It was a great idea that just wasn't perfectly realised, I think. So moving on from there, next up is a book I borrowed from the library. It's called The Blind Owl. It's by an Iranian author called Sadiq Hidayat. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. And this one was a 5-star read for me. Now, this is a book that was referenced in a book I read previously, last month or December, I can't remember which, and I'd never heard of it. And so it made me interested to read it. This book is essentially the story of a young man who drifts into madness after losing his lover. It's a fairly bleak story in some ways, and yet it's quite spellbinding despite that. There's a lot of really surreal imagery and this constant repetition that creates a kind of claustrophobia within the story that added to the narrator's despair and his descent into madness. This translation flowed really nicely, and it certainly left me with a lot of thoughts and ideas that I wanted to process after reading the book. I think it's probably a work that would actually really reward a second reading as well, because I think it's something you take away different things from each time you read it. So I definitely recommend it if a sort of surreal, crazy book sounds like your sort of thing. Going back to NetGalley, I read Fabulous in Tights by Hal Bodner. This is a 4-star read for me. It's a gay romance superhero story. It had plenty of humour. I thought, the story itself, the plot and everything that happened was fairly predictable, and I saw the twist coming before it was actually revealed. But that wasn't really an issue. I still found it enjoyable. There was plenty, as I said, plenty of humour, some good action, and everything you'd want from a superhero story, really. So if you love superheroes, you like gay superheroes, definitely check out Fabulous in Tights by Hal Bodner. The next 4 books are all graphic novels or manga that I read from NetGalley. The first of these is called Katakoi Lamp, and it is by, sorry, just adjusting my stance in my seat. It's by Kyohei Azumi, and this was a 4-star read for me. This is a story set in a cafe, and the cafe owner has started to notice this regular who keeps coming in. And the guy is constantly looking over towards him, and he starts to think that maybe the guy has a crush on him. And he starts to develop feelings for him in return, only to discover that the guy is actually looking at the cute waitress who's usually standing beside him. There's obviously a series of events take place until finally true love triumphs, if you like. So it's a happy ending kind of boy love. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, it's a sweet romance, a little bit of angst along the way, then definitely check that one out. The next one I read is called BL Fans Love My Brother by Oyamada Mimu. This is a book about a girl who discovers her older brother, who's been closeted away in his room for years, is secretly writing boy love manga, and he's actually quite a popular writer. And when he's asked to go to a convention, he sends his sister in his place because he's too shy to go out on his own. So she ends up becoming the sort of face of the author, if you like. This was a 3-star read for me. There were things I liked about it. I liked the premise. I thought it was quite a cute story. Eventually he does kind of emerge and slowly make his way into the world. The thing that kind of spoilt this book a bit for me was the kind of derogatory language surrounding the boys' love as a genre, and him as an author of it. Excuse me, I just need a quick drink. It wasn't nasty, but I just kind of felt that detracted from the fun sense of the story, that he was constantly saying, you know I'm garbage because I write boy love. And that didn't quite work for me, which is just why the rating came down to a 3. Next up, another boys love manga, This Wonderful Season with You by Yusen Atsuko. This is a book about, it's a kind of opposites attract story. We have the geeky young guy who ends up forming a relationship with the more of the jock character. This was a 4-star read for me. I thought it was really sweet. I loved how their romance developed. It was nicely handled. It wasn't rushed, which makes it a little bit of a slow burn, I guess. It's more of a sweet side of things than erotic, but it was a really cute story. So if that sounds like it's your sort of thing, do check that one out. We're coming into the last few. So the final graphic novel I read from NetGalley for the month was Villainous. This was by Stonie Williams and Jeff Sadzinksi. And this is a story of a girl with powers who's keen to become a registered superhero, if you like. So she joins the sort of main agency and is thrilled at first when she's assigned to one of the lead heroes to be her mentor. However, she quickly discovers things are not quite as rosy in the superhero agency as she thought, and that maybe the bad guys are not the bad guys after all. It's a typical story, changing sides kind of thing. I don't want to say too much and spoiler it, but this was a 3.5-star read for me. Overall, I liked it. It was fairly predictable. The illustration was fine, but I didn't go mad about it. So it's a middle of the road read, but it's enjoyable. Again, if you like superhero stories and graphic novels, it's worth checking out. Sticking with NetGalley for the next 2 still. The first book I read was Date Alive Volume 1 by Tsunako and Tachibana Koushi. And this is a light novel. It has an interesting premise in some ways. It's about everyone's living in a world in which occasionally these spirits, as they're called, appear. And whenever a spirit appears, destruction follows and whole towns can be wiped out. And the military are kind of looking just for ways to kill them. But another group is looking for ways to negotiate with them, if you like, or sort of form some kind of communication to try and stop the damage that occurs when they appear. And they decide the best way to do this is to romance them, because they tend to appear as young women. And so they send in this teenage boy whose job is to romance and date one of the spirits in order to open a line of communication. So it was quite a fun premise. It took a little while for me to get into it. At first, I really just didn't engage with it at all. It was probably about halfway through the story before I started to click and to enjoy it. As such, it gets 3.5 stars from me. By the end of the first book, I was interested in what would happen next, but not desperately so. So if I get an opportunity to read the next volume, I would, but I wouldn't rush out to find it, if you see what I mean. So I just felt that the writing and pacing could have been improved a little bit, just to engage me a bit earlier on in what was happening and with the characters. But by the end, I had felt that connection, but it was quite late on. The final NetGalley read for this month was one I finished just last night, A History of the Vampire in Popular Culture by Violet Fenn. This book was a 2.5-star read for me. It's written very recently, so one of the pluses of the book is that it does include references to some of the more recent adaptations, such as the BBC Dracula from a year or so ago. You can also tell the author's enthusiasm through the writing. That really shines through, which is nice. However, where this dropped for me in rating was the fact that I've read other books on this theme before, and this one doesn't really add anything new. Although she's referencing a few newer works, the basic talk about, vampirism as sex and death and blood and things, it's all been done a million times before in other books of a similar ilk. So I didn't think this one added anything particularly new and revelatory to the discussion. There were also 2 points when I spotted factual errors in something she was saying about the plot in some books, in 2 different books, and that really irked me, that she's wants to be an expert on vampires in popular culture, but she was getting aspects of the stories in quite well-known novels wrong. So for me, that kind of let it down. I feel that if you are someone who hasn't read a book on vampires in popular culture before, then there would be something that you'd find interesting here. But if you, like me, you've already read several books on the subject, then this one is not the best of them, and it doesn't really add anything major that hasn't been said before, which is why it got 2.5 stars from me. And that brings us to the final book for the month, which is a book I borrowed from the library, and it's Pachinko by Lee Min Jin, a Korean author. I've previously read her book, Free Food for Millionaires, and I didn't give that one a very high review. I think it was something like 2.5 stars or something. I found it overly wordy and just didn't relate to the characters at all. So I approached Pachinko a little bit hesitantly, I guess. But I'd heard such good things about it, I decided to give it a try, and I'm glad I did, because compared to the other book, this one is awesome. I gave it 5 stars. It's about a Korean family. The story spans about a century, essentially, from early 1900s up to the end of the 20th century. And it's about a family from Korea who end up going over to live in Japan, and the difficulties they find there in terms of racism against them and things. And it's a really fascinating story. I thought it was nicely paced. It's a long book again, over 500 pages, but it didn't feel a slog like her previous one did. This one really flowed nicely. The pacing was great. I loved the characters, and as I was reading, I could really imagine it being done as a K-drama, and I could actually picture certain actors playing some of the roles. So this was great for me. It's definitely a book I'd highly recommend if you like a sort of family saga with aspects of history, and definitely check out Pachinko by Lee Min Jin. So that brings us to the end of my February reads. As I said, I'm just about on track with my Goodreads goal, although I have been a bit slow on the reading front due to tiredness lately. I still have about 7 or 8 NetGalley ones waiting. I've got a library book that I requested coming in, which should arrive this week. And I've still got something like 20 books from birthday and Christmas to get through as well. So I've got plenty on my TBR pile, and I will eventually get through them all. But that was it for this month. As I said, I'm going to end there for today, but I hope you'll join me again. As usual, I'll have a couple of vlogs earlier in March, some tags for AuthorTube and BookTube for you. And then I'll be back again at the end of the month with my TV and film and book wrap-ups. So I hope you'll join me again. Thanks for sticking with me for this stream, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now, everyone.